see, Queen Anne's lace, 8 feet tall, 7 feet tall. Queen Anne's lace is a wild carrot. Docus carota, our cultivated carrots are derived from this plant. Oh. And so the first year it just makes a rosette and a long taproot, which would be a carrot. The second year it shoots up and makes a flower. And then later in the season, if you come biking in the fall, these flowers will kind of go into the fruit stage and make these like little, they almost look like birds' nests. Oh yeah. It's got a nice parsnippy, real carrot smell. Actually smells kind of nice. But again, what we've done is selected for ones that are bright in color and more nutritious. It's called Joe Pieweed. It's a species of Eupatorium. Eupatorium maculatum kind of refers to the macula, the spotting on it. And it really is a species of wetlands, you know, kind of like our, you know, jewelweed or some of the species that legally define a wetland, such as sensitive fern. And this is in the tomato potato family. It's got that nice star-shaped flower. Bittersweet nightshade. This is a species of milkweed, but if you think of the common milkweed, the flowers are more purple, and they're at the top of the plant, not in the sides, in round balls. And my guess is this will be some kind of a swamp milkweed, but fairly uncommon. Apparently, this sap can make kind of like a limited type of a band-aid. So I got this cut on my hand, and the latex sap I can put on. It'll, maybe you've seen these liquid band-aids these days. Mm-hmm. Well, this is probably the natural inspiration for it from this plant, some kind of Asclepias or milkweed. And this is the entrance to the culvert from the other side that looks like a regular walkway for animals in this really wet ditch on the side of the trail. Has these really cool, perfectly circular heads of flowers. And this is button bush. See, the old-fashioned buttons might have been like that. These are, let's see, these are starting to go into fruit now. Day flowering evening primrose. Again, some common names can be really confusing, and the evening primrose family has a lot of flowers that bloom after the sun sets, but this one will flower during the day. And these big stalks, very distinctive. But on the other side, this is American bamboo or Japanese knotweed, Falopia japonica. It's an Asian species. The problem with it is that it can get into natural areas, displace native plants, and then change the ecological conditions. I'd like to see instead of that are native grasses, like this deer tongue grass, one of the widest bladed grasses that we know. It's in the genus Panicum, which I like to think that the little fruits look like little exclamation points. So when you see the plant, don't panic, you know. Jewelweed is a native plant that's very succulent. It has a thick, fleshy stem that stores water. It also makes these beautiful jewel-like flowers. However, the jewelweed name comes from the fruits. It actually has 2 types of flowers. And I'm just going to borrow one here. These showy hummingbird pollinated flowers. They have this really neat spur in the back which makes nectar, so the hummingbirds stick their tongue in there to get the nectar. These are formed later in the season. The very first flowers to be formed, and this might be one of them, are what we call cleistogamous. The flowers never open and they're fertilized in the bud. Bears like a salad now and then. This is what another of their 3 favorite summer foods. So we've got jewelweed, we've got wild lettuce, and all we need to do is look around for maybe some jack in the pulpit, probably grow in a more shady condition. That would be round out the 3 favorite summer foods of bears.
Should you run into poison ivy and you come into contact with it on your skin, this is a real common plant, and sometimes it's found growing near poison ivy. It's called jewel weed, and if you were to take the stem and crush it up and then rub it on your skin, it will prevent you from getting poison ivy.
Looks like there's a little purple flower blooming down there. That's purple loosestrife. There's a few clumps of purple loosestrife. That's a non-native invasive plant, very serious invader.
Thought to be brought in as a garden plant. The problem is that an individual plant could make, hundreds of thousands of seed. They're easily spread. They can get into natural areas and take up land that could be used for native wildflowers such as goldenrods. This is goldenrod. It's not quite flowering yet. They generally flower in late summer.
Open marsh and then some shrub swamp. Probably again more, looks like from here more dogwood, silky dogwood.
And it's silky because if you take the leaf and bend it and pull, you get these silky threads.
But it's not all wet. Looks like the ground rises up to be a bit of an open field over there with the goldenrods in the background.
This, if you look really close, has these backward prickles on it, and it's actually called tear thumb. You can see it kind of sticking to my thumb here and tearing it. There's actually 2 species of tear thumb. They have these really cute clusters of blossoms which look like little French knots, like embroidery. But you walk through this, it claws at you, it tears you, and your thumb is ripped and bleeding. But it's a, you only find this in the swamp. That's why, you're not going to really run into this if you're biking along the trail. But just right next door, there's all this, cool nature to look at.
Fall, of course, when you're biking along and you smell grapes, that's what it is.
Not all the grapes are really tasty, however, some can be kind of dry and bitter, but there's one species called the fox grape. Sometimes you bike by an area, you smell that fragrance in the fall. That's Vitis lambrusca. And it was important in the development of Concord grapes. We have 2 prickly plants here that they're actually different species. If you notice the way the leaves are arranged here, it's a compound leaf divided into leaflets, but the leaflets are like a hand. They radiate from a central point. Whereas this one, the leaflets are more like a feather. The hand-like arrangement of leaflets is blackberry. And this white is actually a wax. Got prickled. I got prickled. And this is often characteristic of the black raspberry. This plant that looks like a sunflower, and it turns out it is a sunflower. And again, to the casual eye, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, maybe 12 petals or so. But in reality, if we looked at it, that this group of plants is thought to be the pinnacle of evolution, where we've actually reduced the number of flower parts and fused them. So, and it turns out that this is hundreds of flowers jammed on one head. So if I do this, he loves me not, he loves me not. I've just pulled out 4 flowers.
Water's probably more present year-round right in this area. Maybe it's a slightly lower elevation than in the rest of the swamp, and so it doesn't support tree growth. Down over here it looks like it might even be wetter, so it's more herbaceous dominated with the cattails, and there's this white flowered plant is called boneset, and of course the grasses.
Sedges have edges, so they have a triangular stem. Sedges have edges, rushes are round, so they twirl in the stem, and grasses have joints from the top to the ground. These areas on the stem where the leaves are attached. Got all three of these grass-like plants together. So when an area is cultivated into a field and then let go, some of the first plants that come in are staghorn sumacs. And so these feathery leaves, these short shrubs here, are typical of these old field species. The problem is that sumac can't reproduce under its own canopy, and so gradually it's replaced by other plants.
Looks like a red maple swamp, and probably this little intermittent stream is tributary to the Manhan. And, the trees are basically entirely red maple. There may be some ash, white ash or green ash in there. Red maple swamps are about the most common wetland type in Massachusetts, at least inland, and they're really they're pretty variable a lot of times. This is one type that has really very little shrub cover, but a very dense herbaceous layer. That's another red maple. Nice cavity in it there. It looks like maybe owls roosting in there, or raccoons might use that as a den. A lot of cavities in that tree, probably really valuable for wildlife. Hemlocks and white pine growing there. Looks like maybe on a slightly higher spot in the wetland. You'll never find like a white pine swamp. They can't. Pines can't take that kind of flooding, but sometimes they're mixed in wetlands on slightly higher parts of the ground. And you can see that sort of the pines just really just drop out, I mean they're pretty heavy in the understory there. There's sort of a line going back, and then it's all mostly hardwoods. Maybe trembling aspen. It doesn't take much to get the aspen leaves going.
The leaves will flutter in the slightest of breezes because this is the cottonwood, Populus deltoides. The stem of the leaf, the petiole, is flat. You see it kind of catches the breeze and makes them flutter in the slightest breeze. A related plant is quaking aspen. Why is this plant important? Well, this is the favorite food of beaver. And it turns out that the bark, the living tissue on the outside of the stem, that is the source of the most nutrition in the plant, is particularly rich in protein and minerals.
A lot of places in town, the maples that look like sugar maples are Norway maples, which are invasive. If you break a leaf off, the sap of the sugar maple is clear, whereas the sap of the Norway maple is milky.
Very similar. Of course, sugar maple has such a great story about how the abolitionists, the anti-slavery forces, did not want to buy sugar from the South. And so they wanted to develop the maple sugar industry as a economic counter to the southern sugar. White pine can occur in all habitats, but it's mostly associated with a little bit drier conditions and areas. But the beautiful straight trunk made it a prized tree for ship masts. It's very soft. It's actually a beautiful tree, but the branches tend to be a little brittle. I don't know if this one, broke off in a spring storm.
The sycamore tree, the bark peels off in small patches, and there's a variety of colors when that happens, so there'll be some yellowish areas and some gray areas, and it's really a pretty tree, and they can grow quite large, and they like living in or near the floodplain, but they're pretty adaptable, and you see them along city streets and in some communities.
It's really remarkable that most of Massachusetts forest was destroyed and cut down. In 1840, 1850, only about 20 or 30% of Massachusetts was forested, and now we're well over double that. About 2/3 of the state is forested now, about 67%.
A lot of it out.
In the wild, wild west.
Arcadia is about 720 acres. So this is just a small part of the sanctuary that's upland forest. Most of the forest here is a mix of oaks and hemlock. There's a few small streams that braid through the area in little ravines. To get to the nature center, you go around onto Clamp Street and go from there.
We're at the old Pascomet Conservation Area on East Street, and this was the Pascomet Conservation Trust's first property. It's a little more than 4.5 acres, and this part on East Street is a small area. It has a picnic table overlooking the rail trail. We're standing here close to the intersection of Pascomet's property with the rail trail, seeing the variety of plants that are growing alongside the trail and going down towards the river. And I'm seeing some black locust trees, large black locust trees. There's a cottonwood tree, another cottonwood, a couple of good-sized sycamores, silver maple, and over here is a really common site along here. So there's grapevines climbing up a staghorn sumac, and the staghorn sumac has young seed pods.
Morning. Morning.
It's a mixed hardwood forest here, primarily maples. A few other things, like this is a small slippery elm. Variety of ferns here. We're getting close to the floodplain forest, and poison ivy is really common in the floodplain forest, so if you stray off the path, be careful and look out for poison ivy, the 3 leaves. This particular one, which is growing on the bridge that goes over the rail trail, world-class poison ivy right here. This is pretty typical of the landscape that is in between the rail trail and our property, closer to the floodplain and the river. Some people would call this a dingle, so like a small valley, and some of them there's a little bit of water that runs in between them. Growing on the slopes is a mixed forest. We've got some hemlocks, birches, oaks, other hardwoods in here, and a variety of ferns and other smaller plants in the understory. The lower portion of the property parallels the Manhan River and includes a portion of the floodplain of the Manhan River, so it's a really good example of floodplain forest. Here's another tree that's common in the floodplain forest, and this is a cottonwood tree. In the springtime, there'll be a week where the air is filled with white things floating around, and there's so many of them in some places, especially by the rivers, that it collects on the sides of the streets, and it looks like piles of snow. That's some cottonwood tree. This is a transitional floodplain forest. On the other side of the Manhan River here, there's the real floodplain forest, So this side is a little higher, and it doesn't get the flooding that you get on the lower side. In the floodplain forest, the plants have to be adapted to being underwater for a portion of the year so that they're able to survive those conditions. And the plants that have evolved to live in the floodplain forest are very successful, and that's why you can see some just really huge silver maples in here, because they're happy. So it's possible to make a loop from the rail trail along our property, take a look at the river and the floodplain forest, and then get back up to the rail trail.
The Mill River was flowing through this channel, and so the South Street Bridge was a bridge over the river, and it flowed, through town for 300 years of the town before it being diverted in 1940. One day the river was flowing through downtown Northampton. The next day the dike was shut, the river was diverted and flew into a different course. This is approximately where the channel was here, and this little ditch here. River flowing through the town, very important water resource, a place to wash your laundry, and this area right here in Northampton was referred to as Licking Water Ford. Maybe the water, licked at the banks. It was a relatively safe place for people to come and take advantage of the resources that the river offered, and kind of like an informal meeting place.
We're standing on the trail here, and we're looking down on the floodplain forest. The trees here are different than you'll see in the uplands. Most of the trees here are going to be silver maples. We've also got some sycamores. This is a wood duck nesting box, and it is actually used by birds because we've seen empty eggshells in there when we clean it out in the fall. We're standing on the rail trail, and we're overlooking where the Manhan River and the oxbow of the Connecticut River meet. Some orioles here.
You won't see too many rocks on your trip on the Manhan Rail Trail, and we can talk about why that was, to go back to the beginning, to the setting of the stage, with an ice sheet, a continental glacier sitting over top of our heads, not even that long ago, 10, 20, 30,000 years ago.
As you're biking along the bike path, you'll think, well, it's really flat because it's on a railroad grade, but then the question is, well, why is the railroad built where it is? And very broadly, all the way from Route 5 all the way here to Southampton, there's very little change in grade. You just go up a little bit, down a little bit in some sections, but it's very, very flat on a course level. And the question is, well, why is that? Massachusetts tends to be a very hilly state. Flatness is kind of odd in the landscape. And the reason it's so flat, around 10,000 years ago, give or take a couple thousand years, there was a massive body of water called Glacial Lake Hitchcock that that occupied the Connecticut River Valley, all the way from about central Connecticut way up into north of White River Junction in Vermont. That whole valley filled with sediment, and as it drained out, that lake drained out to form the modern Connecticut River Valley. All that sediment is what Easthampton is largely on. And so that plain of water, to some degree, defines the land surface right now. A lot of the soils that we have in Easthampton are lake shore, lake bottom sediments. They're sandy soils along the ring of the lake shore, and they're more clay-based or silty soils on the lake bottom. And a lot of the clay soils underlie large flat areas of wetlands.
So one of the English grasses that was brought over is Timothy. And Timothy is the one I always associate with the farmer going like this, you know, because it's got such a nice compact cylindrical head. It's pretty easily identified. Timothy, but I've never seen one so big. Why is it so big? You know, access to water, the rich soils that we talked about, all these gifts from the glacier and the rivers reworking those sediments.
I like that it's a safe place to ride my bike, and it's beautiful, and I can listen to the birds. I think I heard a blue-winged warbler.
Just now?
Yeah.
I use the bike trail almost daily on the way down to work. And my family, my wife and my young daughter, come down and walk around it all the time. I learned to unicycle on the bike path. And,
Really?
And that, you know, might explain why I can't turn on my unicycle. I can ride a straight line for a long while, but I can't turn.
Today I'm just kind of biking around to get some exercise. I think it's awesome that it's here and that there's so many different parts of it that connect to different towns.
I just come all the way from West Hampton through Northampton on the bike trail and all the way to the end and back, and it's about 35 miles for me, so
nice.
It's a really nice ride.
Way down that way, the way the trees kind of canopy over, it's like you're going through a tunnel. And back in early July, we had gone to the end of East Street to actually up to Route 5, and on our way back it was darker than we expected, and the fireflies were just spectacular. It was like a laser show in that tunnel, so it was really, really cool.
I rescued dachshunds, and this little one was my most recent rescue, and she's learning to walk on a lead, and this is a perfect safe place for her to be. And it's such a very, very pretty way of being not only in the town of Easthampton, but also in wooded sections, so that it makes you feel more connected with nature.
It gives me good exercise, and I get to ride my bike.
And we just used it to go to Woodstar for breakfast. And that's what we
just did.
Yeah, and that's what we like best about it, huh? We can ride into Northampton and have a bagel and a chocolate milk.
We love the trail system. Boom, 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 boom.
Yay!
Best thing Easthampton ever did, Northampton. Best thing.
Yeah, we're very grateful.